£25 billion of government money spent on PPE and test and trace, and both systems littered with problems. We're looking into the emerging cost of the UK's bungled coronavirus response. This is Coronavirus, the latest from the Telegraph. I'm Theodora Louloudis. The cost of the pandemic is becoming clearer, and the numbers are eye-opening. The latest Treasury figures show the total public money spent on the battle against coronavirus has risen to nearly £190 billion. It's led to record borrowing the country will be paying back for many years to come, as well as the possibility of further measures, including tax hikes and reductions in pension rises. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak hasn't shied away from acknowledging the financial challenges the country will face, difficulties he laid out when he shifted the conversation towards Britain's economic recovery, delivering what many have called his mini-budget in the Commons on Wednesday.
People need to know that although hardship lies ahead, no one will be left without hope. So today we act with a plan for jobs. Our plan has a clear goal: to protect, support, and create jobs.
And while announcements of further relaxations of the lockdown rules on Thursday mean many in the entertainment and beauty industries can begin to earn a living once again, the wider cost of public spending's emerging. Calls for an inquiry grew on Thursday after it emerged the test and trace system alone, not yet entirely functional, has already cost £10 billion, and PPE cost £15 billion despite widespread shortages. So to discuss the new Treasury figures, as well as the long-term effects of loosening the public purse strings, I gave our economics reporter Tom Rees a call, and we started by talking about what we know so far about extra health spending.
Essentially, documents were released by the Treasury on Wednesday alongside Rishi Sunak's economic package that revealed that they basically signed off on about 32 billion of extra health spending. While that might not be that surprising given the nature of the current crisis, the documents also revealed that 15 billion of that was spent on personal protective equipment and 10 billion was spent on testing and contact tracing programs.
To the untrained ear, obviously billions, those sound like huge numbers. Tom, are those numbers as big as they sound? And can you try and put them into context for us?
It's quite hard to get a sense of what those numbers mean. So combined, that's the size of the country's entire transport budget, or that's about 15% of total health spending in normal times. That's shocked quite a lot of people. There's been a lot of scrutiny about the government's PPE procurement process, and this has just led to more questions about whether we paid over the odds for this equipment when there was a global scramble to get your hands on it. There were obviously shortages in the UK, and some of the contracts have been questioned by experts. Some of the contracts were given to firms that had no experience in supplying PPE or were already in financial difficulty. So this has just heightened the scrutiny on our PPE procurement process.
Those programmes, as you say, were not without their flaws. You've spoken about the widespread PPE shortages, but the test and trace programme also failed to reach the contacts of up to a quarter of people who tested positive in the first 4 weeks of its operation. And we, of course, still don't have a contact tracing app. How will the government be held accountable for this?
Well, MPs will hold the government accountable through a backbencher group called the Public Accounts Committee. Meg Hillier, the chair of that committee, has already said that she'll be scrutinising every penny spent during this. But there's also calls for an inquiry into the PPE procurement, given how much scrutiny there's been on it. Of course, officials will be answering questions about this for a long time to come.
You wrote in the Telegraph this week, Tom, that Rishi Sunak's gained a reputation for under-promising and over-delivering in his eventful 5 months at the Exchequer. That's not something you could say of many chancellors. In fact, I thought it was a very favourable thing to write. But at a time when jobs across the country are being cut, I mean, just on Thursday, we've had John Lewis and Boots. They've announced 5,300 job cuts. And unfortunately, we're getting fresh news on this every day. Spending this amount of money on schemes that, by all accounts, were flawed, it's not a good look, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. And in the coming months, officials will be thinking a lot more about the money they spent and I'm sure when they tot up the final cost of this crisis, spending 15 billion on just getting the equipment that frontline staff need is not going to look good. And there's a lot of tough questions that the Chancellor and officials will have to answer in the next coming months. The budget will be in the autumn, and Rishi Sunak will have to decide then whether to carry on spending or whether he wants to try and control the debt that we've built up during this crisis.
Yeah, that £25 billion sum for PPE and test and trace is part of the £190 billion public spending package. Obviously, debt is going to be a key word there. How are we going to pay this back? And can we make a best guess about when the economy will be robust enough to bear that burden?
Essentially, economists expect our deficit to balloon to more than £300 billion this year. Just to put that in context, that's higher than we normally see in peacetime. And the only times that we've spent that much have been in, say, the Second World War. It is going to push our debt levels up to about 100% of GDP, which is levels we've not seen since the 1960s. And the economy is unfortunately not going to be back to its pre-virus levels for a long time to come, and we'll need quite a lot more support from the government in the coming years.
Tom, Rishi Sunak's announcements in the Commons on Wednesday were referred to by many as a mini budget. Quite how many it actually was is up for debate. He was dealing with some pretty big numbers, and indeed the scale of the crisis is quite alarming. The real budget, or the next budget, is in the autumn. How much do you expect that we'll find out then about the long-term effect of the coronavirus crisis on the economy?
We'll know a lot more about the cost it is taken on our economy. By then, the furlough scheme will have wound down, and we'll know just how many unemployed people we have. We'll also know whether there was ever a second wave of infections that causes us to go maybe back into lockdown. And then beyond that, decisions will have to be made on tax and spend, and whether we want to reduce spending or hike taxes in order to try and get our public finances on the right footing.
It would come just over a year on from the then Chancellor Sajid Javid standing up in the Commons in September 2019 to declare the end of austerity. Tom, could we see a return to it?
I think it's very unlikely that we'll see a return to the austerity that we saw after the financial crisis. I think the government has realised that there's a lot of austerity fatigue after the last 10 years. I think more likely would be either the government just decides to tolerate higher deficits and higher debt levels, or we see them try to rein in the debt pile with tax rises. Boris Johnson has signalled at the election that he really would not hike taxes, but if we don't want spending cuts, then it's the only real way you can kind of consolidate our fiscal position.
The rest of the coronavirus latest news. Indoor gyms, swimming pools and sports facilities can reopen in England from July the 25th. The Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden announced a number of changes to the lockdown in England, including the resumption of recreational team sports from this weekend, even amongst those from different households. Gyms must limit the number of people in the building at one time and allow for social distancing. Equipment must be spaced out and cleaned regularly. Mr Dowden also confirmed that nail bars, beauty salons and spas can reopen from Monday, and outdoor plays and concerts can resume from Saturday. Taxi drivers, cleaners and shop workers are among those who'll be tested for coronavirus even if they're not showing symptoms, under new plans announced by the Department for Health. Firms where workers are deemed to be at higher risk of catching the virus, including Boots, BT and taxi firm Addison Lee, are all set to take part. Those who test positive will need to self-isolate, and results will be shared with the NHS Test and Trace programme to enable contact tracing. In Scotland, groups of up to 15 people from up to 5 different households will be allowed to meet up outdoors from Friday as long as they stay 2 metres apart. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon also confirmed that shopping centres would be allowed to reopen from Monday, and hairdressers, barbers, indoor bars, restaurants, libraries, museums and cinemas can resume business from Wednesday. And while some exemptions to the 2 metre social distancing rule will be introduced, face coverings will be mandatory in shops. If you'd like more detail on any of those stories, as always, I'll put links to the full write-ups in the episode description. If you get hit by a paywall and you're not already a Telegraph subscriber, you can get the first 30 days completely free when you sign up at telegraph.co.uk/audio, and after that, it's just £2 a week. If you're enjoying this podcast, please do consider signing up. If you have a question you'd like us to answer on the show, or a topic you think I should be covering, send me an email. The address is coronaviruspodcast@telegraph.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter. It's at @T_Louloudis. This is Coronavirus, the latest from The Telegraph. I'm Theodora Louloudis. I'll be back on Friday with your final update of the week.